story should start from the beginning, right? We start from where you knew, I could write, and this is what I want to do. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So I didn't actually start off as a writer. Interestingly, I started off as a comic artist. So what happened is that I was inspired by people like Paul Kelemba Mado, Frank Odoi, who are cartoonists, and I started doing cartoons. So that's why I started my journey from. I started doing cartoons, and then in secondary, that's when I started now doing prose fiction. And now I do most prose fiction. I don't do cartoons anymore, but I started actually as a comic writer. And then I never thought I really had a gift. But when I was in campus, I gave one of my lecturers, there was a short story competition, and they were giving an award of 5,000 shillings, which was a lot of money that time. So I wrote a short story very quickly, and I gave it to my lecturer. I told him to know, please read it for me and tell me what to think about it. But instead of him reading, he actually came back to the class and told the class, you know what, I read the most interesting story. Can you all read the story together? So the whole class read the story together. And that was the first time somebody actually read my work and started critiquing it. And since then, I started writing completely now. Yep.
Yes, but you did not pursue writing as a profession. You decided to be a banker and then write part-time.
Yeah, I don't think, yeah. So I don't think that it was either being a writer or being a banker. I didn't have a choice that I had to choose one of them. So it was like I decided I'm not going to be a full-time writer or I'm going to be a full-time banker. I just find that I'm able to balance both of them. So it's never been a choice for me that either I'm a banker or I'm a writer. I find that I'm a better banker because I'm a writer, and I'm a better writer because I'm a banker. So those two work hand in hand. It's never been a choice for me. Even at the beginning when I was employed, I had already done my first novel, and I said it in the interview that, is it a problem? And they said, no, no problem. So luckily I work for a bank that allows us to explore our creativity, and that also allows me to, to publish as much as I want, talk about my books. Yeah.
Now let's start from your first book. Which year was this, and how was your experience writing this book and publishing this book?
Yeah. So let me pick up from where I left earlier. So when I wrote this book and I gave it to my lecturer, and he said it's a very nice story, I started getting inspired to write more. And at that particular moment, so we lived in Molo for a long time, and but our home is in Joro. So what happened is that in Joro, one of my family friends had been evicted from the house in Molo, and my grandmother had allowed them to come and live in my place. So he used to tell us stories about, the clashes in Molo, the day that the clashes happened, and and I felt I need to write a short story about Molo, just the first day of the clashes. And when I wrote the story, it was a short story. I went to see this lecturer in the university is called Gashanta Kai. He gave me the number of a publisher, told me to go and see the publisher. So I went and saw the publisher. The publisher told me that he likes the stories, but there's no market really for short stories in Kenya. I should consider doing something longer, like a novel. So the story that I had about Molo, I felt I needed to now expand it. So I started expanding it, did more research. I found that what that old man called Joseph Mbure, what he had told me about the clashes actually really happened. So I went and did more research, got more information, put in more stuff there, and then it became the novel, The Last Villains of Molo. So that book was I did finish it in 2002. It took 6 years to get published. It was released in 2008. Yeah, so it was a 6 year wait for it. Yeah. And it became one of those books because it is one of the first books to ever have been written about clashes in Kenya. When the post-election violence happened in 2007, it was a good reference point for people because people thought I was writing about, it was a book about the clashes in the post-election violence. They didn't think it was a book about the clashes that happened 20 years earlier. Yeah. So it was launched at the right time when people are starting to talk about tribe.
Yeah, tribe and violence, tribe. Why did it take 6 years? Is it because you had to go and rewrite it, or?
No, a lot of things. One of them is that the publishing industry in Kenya is very complicated. So as a publisher, for you to survive in Kenya, you have to do school texts. So the publisher has to decide which book can I publish, which has the biggest opportunity of becoming a set book. So if you have a book that is not likely to be a set book, you're likely to stay for a long time. In fact, I'm releasing my book next month. It has stayed for 7 years in the publisher because the publisher has been looking at which other books are likely to get, to become a set book. Those are the ones that get published as quickly as possible. This one of mine, not likely. They don't really publish it immediately. So that's how the structure works. Secondly, I was working with a publisher who didn't have enough resources that he needed to, commit to a work of art. He liked the story, but he didn't have as much resources as other publishers that I worked with. And therefore, it took a bit of time for him to get the resources that he needed. Yeah. So that explains why it took 6 years. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I commend your dedication. And in those 6 years you were
You have no
working with
choice.
Bamba.
I have no choice but to wait, right?
Yeah.
So it's not about dedication. I have no choice. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Once you signed a contract with them, you could not go and cancel it. You had to finish publishing with them.
No, not really. Because you see, I didn't know right now because I work with about 5 different publishers. I think I'm a bit I have much more control than I had that time. Because that time I didn't have nobody knew me. I didn't have a following. I could not guarantee sales. Um uh, right now at least I can do that. But that time I was not able to do that. So I didn't have if I was to remove the book from the publisher, I would have to start from somewhere else. And that book had been rejected by 2 other publishers. So I didn't feel as if it had any other home. I just had to wait here. Normally, the publisher gives you the publishing contract says that at some point you can withdraw from the contract if you feel that they're not achieving what you want to achieve. So I had the choice, but I didn't really have the choice because I didn't have any other home to take the book to. Yeah, yeah.
And that was your experience with your first book. Exciting to write, and then the long wait which you had to wait to get it published. And once it was published,
Yeah.
how did it go?
Yeah, so to be honest, because a lot of other things were happening in my life between the age of 24 and I think 28. So many things were happening in my life. At some point, I was getting married, I was getting kids, I was getting my first job, which is actually still my same job. I was trying to, I went into sales. So many things were happening that really, I didn't feel like I was really waiting. Um, but that book for me was a surprise because when I wrote it, the one thing that I wanted to do was for me to see the book in the bookshop. That was my my ambition. I didn't even think about anything else. But to see that the book being studied in a university or things like that was now kind of a shocker for me as well. Even today, I still don't know. I still expect like I didn't expect that much of attention that it got. So and if I knew about it, I would have probably to never have been released because I would have tried to really perfect it. It was released with its errors, and it became the book that it became. Yeah.
It became the book that built you.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
after it was published, when was it adopted as a set book in universities?
So from 2009, 2010, and 2011, it was a set book in the universities, not in the high school. Yeah. It was also studied at some point in the university in Berlin. So it also went outside the border. So for me, that was why I say it was a big shocker for me because I didn't expect that. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that was great success. Is that now what propelled you to write your second book, or even as that was going on, you're already on to your next book?
So each of my books has a story by itself. So my second book was a children's story, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it was a children's story. So one of my friends was doing an internship at a publishing firm. So she asked me, "Can you do a short story, a story for children?" And I said, "Okay, I can do." So they told me about the theme. It was something to do with AIDS, HIV/AIDS, and I wrote a story and I just sent it to them, and it was published. And then the other one was I was seated in the university we were waiting for some approvals to come from the admin. And while we were waiting, I had gone to the book fair, and I came back with a pamphlet that had some books. So there's a publisher called Sasasema Publications. They had a pamphlet where they had stories about all the famous people in Kenya, like Tom Mboya, people like that. And I said, I asked my professor, why is it that they don't have a book about Wangari Maathai? And they told me, why don't you write it? So they said, look at these people who've written these books. They're very famous people like John C.B. Okumu. I can't be at their level.
Yeah.
And they said, write it. So he asked me to write a synopsis. So I wrote a synopsis. Then he pushed me to take the synopsis to the publisher. So I took the synopsis to the publisher in South B. And then when I took it, the next day he's asking me, have you started writing? I said, no, I'm waiting for the publisher to tell me whether they're going to release it. But he pushed me until I wrote it in 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And when I finished it and I took it, when they were calling me to now telling me that they've seen the synopsis, they like the story, can I write it? I had already written it. So yeah. So that's so each of my stories has a story by itself. Even the story that I'm releasing now in December has a story by itself.
Okay, we'll get to that one. So you've told us the first 3 books. Tell us about the other, I think 4 other books.
Yeah. So then at some point, because remember
and to the next one.
Yes. So that became the Wangari Maathai book. So the Wangari Maathai book, again, it was quite successful. I like the way it has gone out. Again, the publisher came back to me and told me, can you do a story about a story for 5-year-olds? So I wrote a story called We Can Be Friends. Lost But Found. This is the book that we wrote. So yeah, it's a small book for 5-year-olds. So I wrote that. And then remember that I had a few other short stories that I had written. And I was really trying to find out what do I do with these stories. So I put all those stories together and I expanded them to become one story. So I just put 4 stories together. So if you read Den of Iniquities, which is my second novel, actually what I did is that I picked different stories and I strung them together and then expanded the storylines, and I had at the end, every story now came together at the end. That was Den of Iniquities. And then I was part of the team that did Nairobi Noah. So Nairobi Noah was another collection of short stories. So my friend Peter Kemani was doing a collection of stories, and he had asked a few writers. This Nairobi Noah is a series in the Noah series. So each city has the dark side of the city. So when he was asked to do it, he asked me to be part of the writers. I did a quick story. I sent it to him. He liked it. Of Pawns and Players was another interesting story, because what happened is that I was asked by the publisher to write a book to be submitted for the Jomo Kenyatta for the Wahoma Mundahi Prize for Literature. So I thought about it, and I really reflected on what is it that I could use to embody what Wahoma Mutahi was writing about. So if you remember, Wahoma Mutahi was a famous columnist, and he used humor. So I looked at his stories and I felt that if you look at his stories, the biggest thing that they had was simplicity. They were very simple stories, but very complex. So until you read it, you're just laughing. But before you only start reading, at the end, that's when you actually start seeing, really, this is what happens in society. So there was simplicity, there was humor, and very simple characters, but very complex. And also twists at the end. So when I did that, I kind of thought about what is happening right now. What if our Murai was alive right now? What would he write about? He would write about betting. So I had the idea to do a story about betting, and that book is the one that won the Mutahi Prize. Yeah. So every story has a story by itself. Yeah.
I think you're a multifaceted author. I feel like some of your books are driven by the people around you, the stories, and some of them were prompted by the publisher, and you still deliver. I think that's amazing. But you've written a couple of books. Which one do you love the most?
I love um I love of pawns and players. I love each book is I love each book because each book has its own story. Each book has its own place where it took me. Uh,
Mhm.
of course, Villains of Molo was my first book, so I love it because like the way you would love your firstborn.
Mhm.
Uh, then um, then it was hugely successful,
Mhm.
and for some time it was difficult for me to think whether I could write. So between Of Pawns and Player, between The Last Villains of Molo and my next novel is about 8 years, because
Mhm.
I didn't know I had already put my everything into this one book.
Yes.
It was a one shot, like a it's like you have a bazooka, so you have only one shot at
Yes.
success.
Yeah.
And then I didn't know if I could write, so I was like a one hit wonder. And for a long time, I was kind of stuck. I didn't know what to write about. And then I wrote now Den of Iniquities.
Mm.
And then I loved writing of pawns and players because I had reached a point where I was not I was not, if you think about when I wrote of pawns and players, I had just won the BAT Award for African Young Literature for my book called Finding Colombia. So I felt that I didn't have any pressure by anybody to release anything or to write anything. So I was writing without any kind of pressure. I had proved myself. I didn't need to prove myself to anybody. So I was
Yes.
kind of a free spirit.
Yeah.
And then the publisher told me, write about anything, we'll publish. So I had, again, a lot of freedom in my mind to write anything. I
Yes.
started writing without knowing how the story would end. So I started writing without the end in mind. And
Yeah.
I was just putting my words on piece of paper. At some point, I got stuck, but
Mhm.
ultimately, I was writing without any kind of, there's no fear of failure and things like that.
Yeah.
And I knew that if it doesn't work out, there's no risk to my career and things like that. Yeah, yeah. So I kind of like Of Pawns and Players. It was a good story to write, and I loved it as well. And I see that also the audience loves it as well when they talk to me about the books that they love. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Latest book. Could you tell me a bit about your latest book?
So my latest book has stayed for this is the seventh year. I wrote it in 2015,
Mhm.
and I finished work on it in 2016.
Mhm.
So it's an interesting story because I'm trying to experiment a couple of things. Number one is that I'm trying to experiment with tenses. So part of the book is in present tense, present participle, and the next part is the past tense. And you won't understand why until you read the book up to the end.
Mhm.
The second thing also, I'm experimenting with different ideas that I have around how we live as a community. And what happened is that I was seated somewhere.
Mhm.
I was actually driving, not seated somewhere. I was driving on Ngara,
Mhm.
and at that point, they were just constructing the Ngara flyover, that flyover. And at some point, there was fight between city council and the hawkers. When
Mhm.
they started fighting, I didn't know what to do because now it was in the traffic. I could not move forward. I could not move back, and the stones were coming all over. So I was just worried whether they're going to hit my windscreen. But I didn't have any choice. I just stayed there. Then
Mhm.
when I was sitting there, I discovered that the hookers were not. If right now there was something that happened, we would all jump into different directions. But
Yeah.
the hookers were very systematic. They were not going into all directions. They were flowing in one direction. So I discovered actually that there's a very elaborate system where hawkers work together in line. They have people who actually watch out for them and they give them directions. This is where the kanjo are, and they're able to move within town. That's how hawkers will disappear from one side of the street and come back to the other side of the street where they're not being chased, because it's a very elaborate system. So when I
Mm.
discovered that, I actually started writing a story about one of those guys who is they call them the Rido. Yeah, yeah. So
Wow.
so I love it because of the some of the things I experiment with are around that story of the rich and the poor, which I try to use in my stories as well. There's that whole disconnect between the gap between the rich and the poor, so wide that it's very difficult to fathom. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And why did it take 6 years to be published?
Some similar things that I mentioned. One of them, of course, is we've been doing a lot of curriculum changes. As a result of the CBC, there's been a need for set books and new text, school texts for all ages from all grades, and a lot of supplementaries and all that. So it's really not been a priority for the publishers to publish works of art. Secondly, the publishing works of art, they want to see, can this book be a set book so that I can recover my losses? If you sell in Kenya, if you sell about 1,000 copies, it's considered a bestseller. But if a book becomes a set book, you're likely to sell about 200 to 400,000 copies. So you can see the difference. Yeah. So if you're a publisher, and the publisher is a normal businessman like you and me, they would want to, of course, maximize on where they can get more returns, because it's going to cost you the same amount of time to edit a school text as you would this other kind of novel. So of course they put their priorities where they are. Yeah. In fact, for me, it's because I'm sure the author, the writer, the publisher that I'm going to sell at least 1,000 copies, just because of my own initiatives on social media. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So that at least pushed them. What would
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
say? What would you say literary success is for you? Like where you get to that point and you say, wow, I am finally a very successful writer. Or have you reached that place already? Let me not assume.
Yeah. So for me, I don't write for money. If I was to focus on money, I would not be a writer, because I can't get the same amount of money that I get in the bank as I would writing. So if I wanted to, if I was in it for money, I would just become a banker, a full-time banker. But for me, the couple of things that happened to me. One is that I was in so one person sent me an inbox in 2009 and told me on my Facebook, and they told me that, you know what, your book saved my life. My family lost everything in the 2007 clashes. And because they lost everything, I didn't know whether there could be any reconciliation or things like that, or I didn't think that ever there would be any hope for me and my family. So I actually wanted to commit suicide. And when I read your book, The Last Violence of Molo, I know the last part you're talking about reconciliation, although it is very fluffy and maybe it is not it's not true in the real world, but that kind of gave me some hope that actually there could be some hope in the future. So whenever any moment that comes and people tell me that, your book changed my life like that, for me, that is success. I don't need to sell 1 million copies. In fact, I give out most of my books to schools and to libraries and things like that. But when someone tells me something like that, I really feel that I really changed their life. And people come back to me and tell me, because of your book about betting, now whenever I see an advert in the newspaper, I know what they're trying to do. There's a friend of mine called Bankelele. Whenever there's something that somebody has won something, he normally sends me that screenshot very quickly, because I can see that really my book resonates with him. Those are some of the things that I feel that for me, that's success. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. I mean, that's amazing. Thank you. We've talked about your books. I think you've written what, 10 books? We talked about.
I think okay, yeah. So I think there are 15. Um, The reason I'm saying I think is because I saw with my recent publisher's statement is that they have done, sometimes they do country versions. So while I've done 13, there are two versions there's a Rwanda edition and a Tanzania edition of the same book, but it's a bit different, and actually it pays a bit differently. So yeah, yeah. So my publishers sometimes do that, and maybe because they want to change, a few things in the story, but that's a whole new book. So I can say it's 15, but the ones I've done by myself is 13, and with other people, eight collaborations with other writers as well. Yeah, including this Nairobi Noah. Yeah.
And you mentioned that writing doesn't pay, and you're such a successful writer, if I may use that word, because you've written books and they've even crossed borders, even international waters, and it doesn't pay well. And I would think your publishers would be on top of it with your royalties and all that. How come writing doesn't pay well?
Yeah, actually, it does. It's not that writing does not pay.
Mm-hmm.
When I was answering that question, I was looking at it from the view of working for the bank. vis-a-vis being a full-time writer.
Yeah.
It's a very big difference in terms of how much I make. Of course, I would be a writer and I could be a full-time writer. There are many other options that I could do if I was a full-time writer. For instance, I have a lot of my writer friends who do coaching for other writers. They do events. They go, they do book signings. They do associated products. Like for instance, somebody is a writer and is also a speaker, so he has speaking engagements. So
Mhm.
when you are a full-time writer, you're able to do many other things that associate you with your brand as
Mm.
a writer. So and I have some people who actually do that for a living, so they're able to make a living from that. I was just comparing what I get as a banker
Yeah.
and what I would get if I was a writer. If I was a writer, probably it would be the same. But writing still does pay. I have so many friends who actually just are full-time writers. So full-time writer, there's a lot of demand for writing right now, especially for storytelling, because a lot of brands really want to do more storytelling than just, pushing their brands. Yeah.
Now you've mentioned writer friends, and I know writing can be a bit lonely. Who is your biggest support system throughout this writing journey?
Oh yeah, so I have a quite what I do is that I surround myself with a lot of mentors. So I have mentors and I have accountability partners. Uh, and I have coaches. So and you have those three. So for my mentors, one of my mentors is, let's say, John Sebiokumu.
Mm-hmm.
What he does is that he helps me to think through a lot of things that I would want to think through. I mentioned straightly that when I was writing of Pawns and Players, I got stuck writing it for some time, and I struggled for some time because I was stuck and I didn't know why I was getting stuck. But he was able to help me unlock by just through one conversation, and I got unstuck. Similarly, when I have other challenges that I need coaching support, or sometimes it could just be accountability partner. You want somebody who it doesn't even need to be a writer, but if you commit to yourself that you're going to write a book, then there's somebody to keep you accountable to it. Because one of the things that you do is that once you say you want to write a book, there are so many interruptions that come into your mind or
Yeah.
come into play. So many distractions. I said in 2021 that a book I want to do 1,000 words a day, and I
Mm-hmm.
had accountability partners who kept me accountable. So in 2021, I wrote another book, which is again yet to be published. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Wow,
have to rewrite it. Yeah.
how many books do you have that are waiting to be published?
I have I have one that is waiting to be published,
Mm-hmm.
and two that are have started writing but have not completed. So this year I had said I was going to complete it, but I had to finish a couple of things from the workplace and also had to get a few certifications out of the way. So that kind of blocked my writing for this year. But 2023, I plan to finish one story, at least one of the stories that has been just blocking my mind. Yeah, my creativity. Yeah.
You know, you've talked about the writer's block and how others have come in and helped you. I mean, it's very relatable. Um, what else I would like to ask is if you were to meet just one author, just one writer that you look up to and spend time with, who would it be and why?
And undoubtedly,
Mhm.
Major Mwangi. So Major Mwangi, he lives in the coast. I know he lives in the coast, but I don't know where. So I've been trying to reach out to him, and maybe when I come to Kenya, I'm going to try and look for him.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I followed most of my writing is actually inspired by Major Mwangi because he's able to tell a story about poverty without it looking like poverty. He makes it look so normal. You don't feel sad for the characters that they're poor, and they're suffering and all that, but they're not very rich. But they have a life of their own that you don't see in many other writers. So I would like to spend time with Major Mwangi. Yeah.
That is nice. And for up and coming writers, what are some of
Yeah.
the traps you would tell them to watch out for?
I think two things. I think now we have a lot more support than we used to have. I remember when I was coming up as a writer, I didn't
Mhm.
even have a laptop or a computer, and I used to walk sometimes from when I didn't have fare. I used to walk from Ngong Road, I used to stay up to Langata, where my friend had a kind of a those cyber cafes, he had a cyber cafe. And when I could go there and try and type my manuscript, so my manuscript was typed by so many other people. It was very difficult to put it together because it was typed by so many other people. So right now we have a lot of support. We have writers groups. We have social media. So you have many more avenues for you to actually get your word out known. So if you can try and use whatever you have right now, you can use social media. One of my good friends, he's no longer an up-and-coming writer. He's now an established writer. It's called Charles. He wrote a book. He wrote a story called it's something about the Uber driver, Adventures of an Uber driver, around the night, around Nairobi in one night, which became a sensational story, but it debuted on Facebook first before anywhere else. So now we have chance to actually get real-time feedback, because once you write a book and it has an error, you have to recall that book. Uh, but now on Facebook, you can just edit it. You can edit, so you have actually a chance for people to actually really interact with you, build a brand, so that when you release a book, at least you have like 1,000 people who can buy the book on the first day. So I think that's what I would do. I think take advantage of the communities that we have right now. There's so many, you can interact with writers right now. If you want to talk to anybody, you can talk to them. They're available on social media. Those are things that we never had when I was trying to start my career as a writer.
Wow. What does the future look like for you?
I don't know. I don't know, and that's very difficult. That's very difficult for me to answer because like I mentioned, like all I wanted was to see my book in a bookshop.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought that I would get my book. I would never thought that I would get anybody speaking about my book. And I remember once I spoke to a publisher because I wanted to get a side job in reviewing their books, and then they would pay me. So I told them, "Can I review your books?" And I remember the person who spoke to, they said, we can't we can't give you, because we only give this to established writers. So I felt hurt by that. Interestingly, the other time they were looking for me for something, a project, and they told me, you know what, we know we can't afford you, but we'd like you to help us with this project. So that's a whole turnaround, like from someone thinking that, you are not worthy, to somebody thinking that they're not worthy of you. It for you, it's you don't know what next, because you've reached levels that you never expected to ever reach. So for me now, it's more about impact, more about thinking beyond Kenya, Kenya and Africa, because those are markets that it's easy for me to sell a book in Kenya. This book that I've not even released it yet, but people are already sending me money for it. They just want to know how much money it's going to cost, which means that already I have struck I have already some clientele, but I've not tried international markets. That's maybe the next thing that I want to do. Yeah. Which means even from the writing has to be a bit different from the local market. Yeah.
Yes. Would you say you're interested in probably adapting your books into films or series or movies? And who do you see
Yeah,
acting if you are?
yeah, we've had a lot of conversations with movie producers.
Mm-hmm.
The process that we had was adapting The Last Villains of Molo into a film.
Mm-hmm.
The the challenge with it is the cost involved,
Mm-hmm.
because what the filmmaker, when he did the math, he actually said, for us to do justice to this script, we have
Mm-hmm.
to actually like build a village and burn it to the ground, so that we can actually have, do justice to it. We don't
Yeah.
have that money right now. We don't have that kind of money. And the other thing also, the market in Kenya and Africa is not that big. So likewise, and then also when you think about maybe taking it to Hollywood and getting producers outside of the country, one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that they have a challenge with is they one of these they have a challenge that you'll get the story, and then they get somebody who is, let's say, Denzel Washington to
Yeah.
to to kind of headline the story, and the story
Mm-hmm.
kind of escapes from you. It becomes something that is different from what you intended to write, because you have a Denzel trying to speak Wakanda language, which is not any of the African languages that we know. Yeah. So it's we've had that conversation. I'm open to it. We've had a conversation around The Last Villains of Molo. We had conversations around of pawns and players. We just need to now execute that. Yeah.
Okay. What is the one thing that you would tell your readers, your fans?
My readers, thank you so much. I just want to say thank you for the support. It's great when you write and when you tell. I have fans who've told me we are going to read, we're going to buy your book, even the next 10 books. And some of them have even sent me money. Like I don't know how much a book is going to cost. I'm assuming it's not going to be more than a thousand shillings, and they send me that 1,000 shillings so that I can give them the book in advance.
Mm,
So that kind of support has really helped me because then I don't have to worry about whether the book will sell. I know the book will sell because there are people already talking about it, asking me if they can share it on their social media.
mm,
So a lot of support from my readers, which I enjoy, and also a lot of feedback as well. People come to me and tell me, I saw a mistake on this page. Can you rectify it? And of course, the players had a couple of errors because of
mm,
a printing challenge. We took the wrong version to the
mm,
printer, and
mm.
we got feedback from people. And when we got the feedback, we actually recalled some of the books and did another print run. So yeah, feedback is good. Yeah, yeah. I get real-time feedback from my social media as well. So yeah, yeah.
That's amazing. Yes, I know your social media is amazing, and a lot of Kenyan writers look up to you. And I know you also have accolades, awards for your writing. You're really a humble guy. You've not spoken about them, and that's okay. But where can people access your books? If I want to read all of
So
your books or some of them, where do I go?
so interesting, they're all over the place. So they're available in all the bookshops, textbook center, prestige,
Mm,
online. Have a partnership with Raffle Books. Raffle Books normally do a lot of distribution for me as well. Rare
mhm,
Books do a lot of distribution as well. So those are the four areas where you can't miss it. And sometimes people tag me and ask me, where can I get all your books? And then I just also tag them and ask them, do you have this book? So another thing that I do with my readers is that I also help my readers to get, if somebody is looking for a particular book, they can't find it. Instead of them going to textbook center, I ask textbook center for them. That's how I was able to sell a lot of copies, but just also being a salesperson myself. Yeah.
yeah. Hey, that's very innovative. Thank you so much for your time. Maybe any last words or something
No,
you'd like
I'm
to share?
just thankful for the opportunity. I think when I started this journey, I never thought it would be this kind of journey. I didn't think about it like that. And being where I am right now is a result of so many things, from my friends, from my readers, from my family, from my accountability partners, from my coach, from my mentors. Really, thank you to everyone who's been part of my journey. Yeah,
All right.
my
Thank you.
publishers. Yeah,
Yes,
my
definitely.
editors.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much for your time and have a
Thanks
good
a lot.
evening over there.
Thanks.
Have a good evening.